Welcome to Let Jesus Be Your Doctor, the true path to healing for body and soul.
Usually when you wake up in the morning and you look out the window, you just expect to see the world clearly.
Right, you just assume it's all going to be there.
Exactly. You expect the streets to be exactly where they were yesterday. You expect the trees to be rooted in the same spot, the horizon to be visible. You rely entirely on your vision to navigate your daily life. But, well, imagine waking up tomorrow, stepping outside your front door, and you are instantly swallowed by a fog.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a fog so thick, so absolute and suffocating that you literally cannot see your own hand held up in front of your face.
That is a terrifying thought.
It really is. Now, imagine you have to navigate a treacherous, winding mountain path in that exact fog.
And you know there are steep drop-offs on either side.
Exactly. You know they are there, but you can't see them.
You know, that visceral sense of blindness and vertigo, really that is exactly how modern decision-making operates for most of us.
It is. It really is.
We are operating in a profound informational and emotional whiteout. We are bombarded with this unrelenting stream of external input, you know?
Yeah, the contradictory opinions, the targeted data.
Social media outrage, society's expectations. It's the relentless pressure to optimize every waking second of our lives.
The fog isn't just weather anymore. It is the defining characteristic of our era.
Right. And our internal navigation systems are just spinning wildly out of control because we keep trying to use our eyes to see through something that is, well, it's fundamentally opaque.
And the tragic irony is that we look to the noise to cure the noise.
Yes. We always think more is better.
We do. We consume another article, or we download another productivity app, or, I don't know, we ask 10 different friends for advice.
Hoping that adding more particles to the fog will somehow make the air clear.
Which it never does. Finding true north in that environment doesn't just feel difficult, it feels practically impossible.
But what if you didn't have to rely on your eyes in that fog at all?
Okay, where are you going with this?
Well, what if sewn entirely out of sight right into the inner lining of your jacket, you had a built-in, completely unbribable compass?
A compass.
Yeah.
Not a digital app that requires a software update. Right?
Exactly. Not an app, not a life coach you have to put on a retainer, but an inherent organic mechanism designed specifically to guide you through the darkest, most confusing terrain of your life.
We are looking at a paradigm that completely bypasses the intellectual fog today.
We really are. We're stepping completely out of the noise.
And today, we are doing a deep dive into a translated German broadcast series. It was originally titled, Let Jesus Be Your Doctor, the true path to healing for body and soul.
It's a profound title.
It is.
Yeah.
And the entire foundation of this material rests on a single radical premise.
Which is that every single human being possesses this unbribable inner compass.
Yes, which the material identifies as the conscience.
Right.
And that learning to isolate and really listen to this specific inner voice is the ultimate and perhaps only shortcut to genuine peace of mind.
And we really want to set a specific tone for you today. This isn't a life hack productivity seminar.
No, not at all.
We are going to slow way down. We are going to meticulously unpack these original texts.
Paying very close attention to the deep revelations of a woman named Bertha Dudde.
Her writings they are extraordinary.
They really are. And we're going to walk step by step through the actual meditative exercises provided in these translations.
Because whether you consider yourself a deeply spiritual person rooted in a specific faith tradition, or you're just simply someone who is fundamentally exhausted.
Someone trying to make good decisions for your family, your career, and your sanity without completely burning out from decision fatigue.
Right. This applies to you. This is for you.
So let's just take a breath. To do that, we have to start by tearing down a massive psychological block.
The very first thing we have to do is completely redefine what the conscience actually is.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because for centuries, our culture, our literature, and our institutions have framed the conscience in highly punitive terms.
Highly punitive. We picture it as an internal judge banging a gavel.
Or like an angry, disappointed schoolmaster holding a ruler, just waiting for us to step out of line so he can strike.
I know exactly what you mean.
I always think about it like an internal police officer.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Most of us grow up treating our conscience like a cop running a speed trap. You're driving down the highway of your life, just trying to get through a Tuesday nap.
And this cop is hiding behind a billboard in your mind, radar gun drawn.
Yes. He is actively waiting for you to slip up, to have a selfish thought, to snap at your partner so he could pull you over, flash the lights, and write you a massive moral ticket.
And the result is that you end up living in a state of low-grade perpetual anxiety.
Terrified of getting caught by your own mind.
What's fascinating here is how incredibly damaging that punitive framework actually is, because guilt paralyzes us.
It does. It makes us want to hide.
It makes us defensive. But the framework presented in these spiritual texts completely strips away that internal police officer.
It argues that the conscience is not a judge that punishes.
It is a friend that reminds.
Let's just sit with that for a second. A friend that reminds.
It is the divine spark within us that operates with a beautiful, almost shocking binary simplicity. It simply points to an action or a thought and says, this is love and this is not.
A friend that reminds, not a cop that punishes. I love that.
It changes everything.
If we stay with the nautical theme of the fog from earlier, it frames the conscience not as a maritime police boat, but as a lighthouse.
Ooh, a lighthouse. I like that.
Think about the function of a lighthouse. A lighthouse doesn't judge the ship.
Right.
It doesn't scream at the captain for steering too close to the dangerous rocks. It doesn't write a citation for poor navigation.
It just shines.
A lighthouse simply stands immovable on the shore, radiating a steady, piercing beam of light into the fog, revealing exactly where the rocks are and where the safe harbor is.
It shines the light to keep you safe. Its entire function is protective, illuminating, and saving, never punitive.
That is a crucial distinction, replacing the fear of the internal cop with the gratitude for the internal lighthouse.
It transforms the conscience from a tool of heavy guilt into a tool of absolute liberation.
Because when you hear the phrase, this is love and this is not, it cuts through all that paralyzing complexity of moral decision-making.
We spend so much energy trying to justify our actions, don't we?
We do. We say things like, well, I was harsh, but they deserved it.
Or, I took advantage of that situation, but hey, everyone else is doing it.
The ego loves those gray areas. The ego builds its entire house in the gray areas.
But the lighthouse doesn't negotiate with the fog, it just illuminates the reality. Following this voice means following the divine law written directly into your own heart.
But I have to be honest, I have a hard time accepting that this is a universally recognized, easy-to-follow signal.
Why is that?
Well, if this inner voice, this lighthouse, is so inherent, and its message of this is love and this is not, is so simple, why is the world such an absolute mess?
That's the million-dollar question.
Are you saying 8 billion people are just intentionally, maliciously ignoring a loud, clear, loving chime in their heads every single day?
No. They aren't ignoring a loud chime. They are deafened to a quiet one.
Ah, deafened.
And this is exactly where the profound writings of Bertha Dudde enter the picture. She addresses the actual mechanics of why we miss this guidance.
I really want to look closely at a critical passage from her Revelations.
Let's do it. Let's read it slowly.
She writes, quote, "The conscience is the voice of my spirit in you. Whoever respects it hears me. But many drown it out with the world, and so the light that wants to guide you is extinguished."
Wow, the light that wants to guide you is extinguished.
Let's sit with that imagery. It implies that the light is incredibly fragile.
It does. It isn't a blinding stadium-level spotlight that forces you to see it. It is a delicate illumination.
There's a profound tragedy in that sentence, but also a vital mechanical truth about spiritual guidance.
We extinguish our own guiding light, not necessarily out of malice, but through sheer volume.
The noise of the world, she mentions.
Right. It isn't just literal noise. It is the constant influx of media, the frantic anxieties about status.
The endless debates, the podcasts, the notifications buzzing on our wrists all day long.
The tragedy isn't that God stopped speaking. The tragedy is that we allow the sheer volume of our chaotic environments to completely drown out a voice that is actively trying to save us.
We refuse to turn down the volume of our lives. And in doing so, we just blow out the candle.
But even if we accept that we need to turn down the volume, there is a massive lingering doubt here.
Oh, totally. How exactly do we know we are hearing the voice of the Spirit?
Right, because when I sit in silence, I hear 100 different voices.
Exactly. I hear my anxiety about my mortgage. I hear my lingering anger at a colleague from last week. I hear my own wishful thinking.
How do we know we aren't just taking our own neuroses, slapping a divine guidance label on them, and marching confidently in the wrong direction?
Which people do all the time. People have done horrific things in the name of following what they believed was God's inner voice.
It is the ultimate quaint of spiritual discernment, and frankly, the most dangerous trap in spiritual practice.
But Dudde's text specifically, Kungavi number 1565, which is titled Voice of the Conscience, does not leave us hanging in ambiguity.
She provides a highly specific, almost clinical answer to distinguishing that voice.
Let's look at her instruction manual here. This is so important.
Go ahead, read the passage.
She writes, quote, "You have no surer sign for what is right than the voice of conscience, the voice of the heart, which truly guides you right."
And she continues.
If you ever do not know exactly what you should do, think, or say, you need only call upon God in all inwardness, and he will make it known to you, so that every doubt, every indecision vanishes, and you are clear and conscious of your actions.
Every doubt, every indecision vanishes.
That is an incredibly bold, sweeping claim. I know very few people who operate with zero doubt or indecision.
It is bold, but she anchors it in a very specific mechanism. She continues with this crucial sentence, and we really need to pay attention to this.
What does she say?
She says, every false thought triggers discomfort in you, and every right thought will make you glad.
And there it is. She moves the entire concept of the conscience out of the realm of pure abstract intellect
And places it firmly in the realm of the body.
She is linking spiritual truth directly to a somatic physical indicator. Every false thought triggers discomfort in you.
We have all experienced this, even if we didn't have the theological language for it.
Oh, absolutely. Think about a time you're about to make a decision. On paper, logically, it made perfect sense.
Maybe it was a lucrative business deal or a sharp comeback in an argument that would absolutely win you the fight.
Your brain is saying, do it. This is the smart play. This makes sense.
But right in the center of your chest, or maybe sitting heavy in the pit of your stomach, there's a tightness.
A subtle, undeniable disease. A low-frequency hum of wrongness.
It feels like a contraction, like your internal organs are slightly pulling away from the decision.
Yes. You can't always articulate to someone why it feels wrong, but your body is screaming a quiet no.
Precisely. The body is acting as a sounding board for the spirit. And conversely, Dudde says, every right thought will make you glad.
We need to be careful with the word glad here, don't we?
We do, because in a spiritual context, gladness doesn't mean giddy, jumping up and down happiness.
Right. It's not like winning the lottery.
Exactly. It means a profound, settling peace. It is the feeling of a heavy breath leaving your lungs.
A feeling of deep internal alignment.
When we are aligned with love, there's a physical release of tension. When we are aligned with falsehood, ego, or selfishness, there is a physical contraction.
That is the metric. Not a booming cinematic voice from the clouds.
No, just the quiet internal shift between somatic discomfort and somatic peace.
But this raises a paradox.
Okay, what is it?
Let's say I successfully quiet the noise. I feel the contraction in my chest when I contemplate lying, and I feel the peaceful release when I contemplate telling the difficult truth.
So you have clarity.
Right. I know exactly what the lighthouse is illuminating. Why do I still so often choose to steer the ship directly into the rocks? Knowing the right path and actually walking it are two entirely different battles.
They are. And the text addresses this with a refreshing bluntness regarding human nature.
Dudde dives into the reality of human willpower, and she points to a fundamental flaw in our design.
She writes that humans, on our own, are simply too weak-willed. We do not possess the internal horsepower to consistently choose the good just through sheer isolated determination.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it is such a relief to hear that acknowledged.
It is. We live in a culture utterly obsessed with the myth of infinite willpower.
The entire self-help industry, the whole hustle culture, it's built on the premise that if you just grind harder, wake up earlier at 4 a.m., and force yourself into disciplined perfection, you can conquer any moral or physical failing.
But this spiritual text looks at that modern philosophy and says, no, frankly, you don't have the strength. You are weak.
But this is the turning point. You are meant to do it alone.
It completely dismantles the isolation of modern individualism. The text introduces the concept that because we are too weak-willed in a vacuum, we are offered profound supernatural assistance.
Dudde writes that the urging of spiritual friends toward a good deed is often the actual reason that deed is carried out.
Spiritual friends.
If we go back to our lighthouse metaphor, these would be the lighthouse keepers.
The people actively maintaining the light and guiding the ships.
But how does this actually work? Are we just puppets being dragged around by invisible forces?
Not at all. There is a very specific spiritual physics to how this assistance is activated, and it all revolves around the law of attraction and the human will.
The text explains that it begins with intention.
Right. When a person simply wants to act rightly when they orient their intention toward God or toward love, even if they know they lack the strength to execute it perfectly,
That oriented will acts like a powerful spiritual magnet.
Dude says this goodwill stubbornly rejects what is false. And because attracts in the spiritual realm, this sincere desire to do good actively attracts what the text calls knowing forces.
So the prerequisite isn't perfection.
No.
The prerequisite is simply desire.
Exactly. These knowing forces, these spiritual friends, are drawn to the light of your good intention.
Once they arrive, they don't override your free will.
No, they fortify it. The text says they then teach the person truthfully. They provide the clarity, the subtle nudges, and the supplementary strength that our own human willpower lacks.
Think about the immense pressure this takes off your shoulders as you navigate your life.
It's massive.
The only requirement to receive this profound, unseen guidance is the sincere desire to do what is right. You don't need a spotless track record.
You don't need an unbreakable will of iron.
You just have to fundamentally want the path of love.
Yeah.
That simple internal posture of desire is the activation key.
It aligns your will, and it signals these knowing forces, these lighthouse keepers, to come to your aid.
If you can learn to sit still in the fog, you can begin to feel their subtle urges, distinguishing the pull of love from the frantic pushing of your own fear.
What's fascinating here is that it is the ultimate democratization of grace. Meaning absolutely no one is disqualified from receiving divine help, as long as the intention of the heart is turned toward the light.
Which perfectly brings us to the insights of Bruno Gröning, another figure highlighted in these translated materials.
Yes, Gröning takes this idea of universal access and really crystallizes it.
He refers to the conscience as the divine compass.
And he emphasizes that this compass works in every human being, completely independent of their religion, their cultural background, or their acquired intellectual knowledge.
He says it speaks through the feeling of truth, that deep internal knowledge that grants us peace when we do the right thing, even if that right thing is incredibly painful or difficult.
Gröning is actively dismantling the gatekeeping of spirituality here.
Because for a long time, there's been an assumption that divine guidance is reserved for the elite.
The highly educated theologians, the cloistered monks, or the perfectly pious.
But Gröning is saying, no, you do not need a theology degree to feel the truth.
You don't need to have memorized sacred texts to possess a conscience. The feeling of truth is hardwired into the base operating system of humanity.
It is a universal inheritance.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source material weaves together a sequence of quotes from various mystics and biblical texts spanning centuries.
They are all using different language to point at the exact same phenomenon.
Let's really unpack these because they're beautiful.
The first is from the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding.
Lean not on your own understanding. In a hyper-rational, data-driven world, that feels like terrible advice.
Right. We are conditioned to be obsessed with our own understanding.
We want to spreadsheet our way out of every crisis. We want to run the analytics on our relationships and our career paths.
But the writer of Proverbs recognizes a fundamental limitation. The human intellect can only process the data it has already collected.
It is inherently limited by past experience and narrow perspectives.
The conscience, however, is tethered to a much wider divine reality that sees the entire board.
Leaning on your own understanding in the fog means trusting your limited eyesight. Trusting the compass means relying on a signal that transcends the fog entirely.
Then we have this thought from the 15th century mystic Thomas à Kempis. He says, the more you surrender yourself, the easier God guides you.
This goes back to the physics of spirituality we talked about. Resistance creates friction. Surrender creates flow.
If you are constantly fighting for control, gripping the steering wheel of your life until your knuckles are white, guidance becomes a violent struggle.
You are actively fighting the tug of the compass.
But when you relax your grip, when you surrender the desperate need to control every outcome, the guidance becomes effortless. The knowing forces can actually move you.
Next is this incredibly evocative image from Luisa Picaretta.
She writes, the soul that trusts hurries in the divine will like a child holding the Father's hand.
I love this metaphor. I really do. Think about how a toddler walks through a crowded, chaotic city street with a loving parent.
The toddler isn't looking at a map on their phone.
The toddler isn't stressed about the logistics of the subway schedule or terrified of the oncoming traffic.
The toddler is simply holding the hand of the giant who knows the way.
Because of that physical tether, there is a joyful, unburdened lightness to their movement. They can actually hurry, not out of panic, but out of absolute trust.
That is the emotional state this material is inviting us to inhabit.
And finally, a clarifying thought from Derek Prince. Guidance doesn't mean knowing everything, but following the one who knows.
That cuts right to the core of our modern anxiety, doesn't it?
It really does. We constantly conflate guidance with information.
When we pray or meditate, we are usually demanding the 10-year plan.
Show me exactly how this business venture is going to succeed. Give me the blueprints. Or tell me exactly how this relationship will pan out so I know I won't get hurt.
But Prince is reminding us that guidance is step-by-step trust. You do not get the entire map illuminated.
You only get the next step, and you get the guide.
The material synthesizes all these historical voices into one central leitmotif. Trust is the key to guidance. The intellect seeks paths, the heart follows.
So what does this mean for you, listening right now?
It means recognizing the profound exhaustion inherent in relying solely on the human intellect.
The intellect is a wonderful tool, but as a master, it is tyrannical.
It is always seeking, always calculating, always projecting worst-case scenarios to keep you safe. It is exhausting.
The heart, however, when tuned to the conscience, doesn't need to calculate.
It just needs to rest, to trust, and to follow the gentle pull of that inner compass.
But this requires a massive shift, from a life of frantic striving to a life of quiet abiding.
The beauty of this broadcast series, though, is that it doesn't just leave us with lovely philosophical poetry.
No, it transitions into a highly practical instructional guide.
Yes, this is where the material moves from theory into active practice. And it starts by clearing the brush.
If we're going to learn to listen to the conscience, we have to know exactly what we are not supposed to be listening to.
The text outlines 3 things the conscience is explicitly not.
First, it is not simply your feelings.
Second, it is not your opinion.
And third, it is not your upbringing.
We really need to spend some time here because we confuse these internal channels constantly, and it leads to massive spiritual and psychological damage.
Let's look at upbringing first. Many of us hear a harsh, critical voice in our head telling us we aren't working hard enough, that we are lazy, or that we are fundamentally flawed and unlovable.
And we mistakenly think, oh, that's my conscience convicting me of my sins.
No, more often than not, that is just the internalized voice of a strict parent, a demanding religious culture, or unresolved childhood trauma.
That is your upbringing playing on a lure. It is the cop, not the lighthouse.
And we must stop giving our trauma the authority of divine guidance.
That is so important. Right. And what about opinion?
We easily confuse our strong political or social opinions with a divine mandate.
Right. We feel a surge of self-righteous outrage when reading the news, and we think, this anger is my conscience speaking.
But really, it's just our ego fiercely defending its carefully constructed worldview.
Exactly. And feelings are just passing weather patterns. You might have a wave of intense anxiety or a burst of irrational anger.
If you let every passing emotion steer the ship, you will crash immediately.
The text defines what the conscience actually is to separate it from this noise. It calls it the inner touch of divine truth, a fine light showing where love, truth, and God's will reside.
It references Thomas à Kempis again, who says, "A pure heart hears the truth of God like a clear echo."
And Dudde describes it as, my voice as clear as a quiet chime.
Notice the auditory imagery there, an echo, a quiet chime.
It implies a subtle sound that absolutely requires silence to be heard.
You cannot hear a quiet silver chime in the middle of a heavy metal concert.
You cannot hear a delicate echo in a crowded screaming room. You have to cultivate inner stillness to catch the frequency.
And to help us tune our internal receivers to that specific frequency, the text meticulously lists 3 specific hallmarks.
3 non-negotiable characteristics of God's voice in the conscience.
If you are ever wondering, is this God guiding me, or is this just my own ego or anxiety? You run the thought through this 3-part filter.
Hallmark number 1, it is still and gentle. The text explicitly says it is never loud, and it is never pushing. It is an inner knowing, not a shouting.
This is completely counterintuitive to how our biology usually operates.
It is. When we are in crisis, our internal voices are screaming.
Panic screams, urgency screams. You have to fix this right now. Send the text. Make the call. Defend yourself.
The material states categorically that frantic, adrenaline-fueled pushing is never the divine voice.
The divine voice has all the time in the world. It is a gentle, steady, immovable presence.
If you are feeling pushed, shoved, or panicked by an internal voice, you are listening to the wrong channel. You are listening to fear.
Hallmark number 2, it always leads to love.
The text stresses that it never, ever leads to harshness or contempt.
I consider this the ultimate litmus test. If an internal impulse, even one that seems highly moral, righteous, or doctrinally sound, leads you to view another human being with contempt, to write them off as worthless, to act with harshness or cruelty,
It is not the conscience, period.
the divine spark cannot contradict its own nature, and its fundamental nature is love.
Ego loves contempt. The ego thrives on feeling superior to others. The spirit only knows compassion.
And hallmark number 3, it brings peace, even when it corrects you.
The text makes a stunning psychological point here. Even when the conscience points out that you are dead wrong, it does not injure you, it heals you.
And here the material highlights another quote from Derek Prince that I think is the most important sentence in this entire deep dive.
He says, God's voice convinces the enemy, condemns.
We really need to unpack the difference between conviction and condemnation, because distinguishing between the two is the difference between psychological life and death.
Condemnation, whether it comes from the enemy, your ego, or your trauma, is inherently destructive.
Condemnation says, you did a bad thing, therefore you are a bad person. You are fundamentally broken, you are worthless, you are a failure. Go hide yourself.
It crushes your identity under the weight of insurmountable shame.
It's the ancient voice in the Garden of Eden, the voice that says, you are naked and exposed. Go hide in the bushes so no one can see how flawed you are.
Precisely. Condemnation relies on shame to separate you from love and from community.
But conviction, God's voice in the conscience, operates on a completely different frequency.
Conviction says, you did a bad thing, and because I love you immensely, I am going to shine a light on it so you can see it clearly, step away from it, and step back into your true identity.
Conviction doesn't push you away into the bushes, it draws you out into the light.
It highlights the error not to shame you, but to heal the wound the error caused.
That is why it brings peace, even when it corrects you. You feel safe enough to admit you were wrong without your entire identity collapsing.
God's voice convinces the enemy, condemns. If you take nothing else away from this today, remember that distinction.
Now, the material transitions into its most interactive portion.
It doesn't just want us to philosophize about this.
Yeah.
It provides detailed meditative exercises to train this muscle.
We are going to walk through them right now.
The first is a 3-minute discernment exercise. So what does this all mean?
If you are in a place where you can safely do so, if you aren't driving, let the theory drop away for a moment and actually try this with us.
The text asks you to physically place a hand over your heart. Just anchor yourself in your body for a second.
Take a deep breath.
Now, bring to mind a recent situation, maybe something that happened this morning at work, or an argument you had last night where you were unsure of what the right path was.
A moment of conflict. A tough email you had to send. A parenting decision.
Hold that specific situation in your mind. Now, the text asks us to observe 3 distinct, competing voices that will immediately start chattering about that situation.
Let's break down these 3 channels.
In the original German text, the first voice to observe is angst or fear. Ask yourself, what is my fear saying about this situation?
Just observe the quality and texture of that voice of fear. As we discussed, fear is loud. It is urgent.
It paints the world in catastrophic black and white terms.
It tells you that if you make the wrong choice in this situation, you will lose your job, you will lose the relationship, everything will fall apart.
Fear is entirely focused on self-preservation through panic. It constricts your chest.
Okay. Acknowledge the fear. Let it speak, but do not obey it.
Now, shift your attention to the second voice. Ask yourself, what is my ego saying about this situation?
The ego has a very different flavor than fear. The ego's primary objective is supremacy and protection of its image.
It wants to be right at all costs. It wants to defend its status or enforce its will on others.
The ego is the voice whispering, "How dare they speak to me that way in front of the team?"
Or, I have to send this aggressive, sarcastic email right now to show them who is in charge and put them in their place.
It is rigid, defensive, prickly, and deeply concerned with looking good rather than doing good.
So you have the loud, constricting panic of fear and the defensive, sharp pride of the ego. Let them both settle.
And now ask the third question, using the German term from the text. What does my Gewissen, my conscience, say?
When introducing the word Gewissen, it's really important to understand the linguistic nuance.
Yes, in German, it shares a root with Wissen, which means to know.
It is an inner knowing, not just a moral rule book.
And the text reminds us of what we were listening for. The Gewissen speaks quietly. It simply points out the loving path, even if that path requires apologizing or letting go of your pride.
It is simple, clear, and calm.
The mystic John of the Cross is quoted here, describing it as the fine and bright voice of truth.
Notice how radically different that fine, bright texture is from the dark, heavy, tangled voices of fear and ego.
Separating these three internal channels, being able to look at a chaotic situation and say, that impulse is fear, that thought is ego, but this quiet knowing is truth. That is the very foundation of spiritual maturity.
To help make this separation a habit, the text offers an everyday micro-tool. It calls it the 5-second conscience check.
You can use this dozens of times a day in the mundane moments of life.
When you are standing in the kitchen, exhausted, about to snap at your spouse over unwashed dishes, or you are staring at a glowing screen about to hit send on a fiery email draft.
You force a 5-second pause,
Yeah.
and you ask internally, Jesus, what is the path of love here?
It acts as a pattern interrupt. You are forcefully halting the automatic, reactionary machinery of your biology and submitting the moment to a higher, calmer authority.
And then you listen. But remember, you aren't necessarily listening for words. You are listening for the somatic indicators Dud taught us.
You ask, what is the path of love here? And then you observe your internal landscape. Does the idea of deleting the angry email make something inside you become bright?
Does it feel light? Do you feel a sudden, quiet peace? The text states unequivocally, that is God's way.
And conversely, observe what becomes tight. If the idea of sending the angry email feels hard, heavy, or restrictive in your chest, that is not God's way, no matter how justified your ego thinks it is.
The physical body, when consciously submitted to the spirit, becomes a remarkably accurate tuning fork for truth.
But it absolutely requires that 5-second pause to let the vibrations of fear and ego settle so you can actually feel the subtle hum of the conscience.
We are coming to the final practice detailed in the translated material, and it is an incredibly beautiful way to close a day.
It is a 1-minute daily evening cleansing exercise. The text instructs that right before you go to sleep, you sit down in the quiet and you ask one simple, courageous question.
Lord, where did I deviate from your truth today?
This raises an important question about our relationship with vulnerability.
It does, because for most of our lives, asking a question like, where did I mess up today, would induce terror.
It is usually an open invitation for our inner critic to absolutely destroy us with a highlight reel of our failures.
But the text provides a vital, non-negotiable instruction before you ask that question. It says, expect no punishment, expect guidance.
Expect no punishment, expect guidance. Let's just sit with that.
Imagine how differently you would sleep, how differently you would live if you truly expected loving guidance rather than harsh punishment when reviewing your mistakes.
It changes the entire paradigm of self-reflection. It turns what used to be a brutal police interrogation into a gentle medical exam.
You are sitting with the divine physician, as the title of the broadcast series implies, and you are simply finding the splinters from the day so they can be carefully removed.
When you are shown a deviation, when the lighthouse gently illuminates a moment where you acted out of ego or snapped at a coworker out of fear, the text advises you to simply acknowledge it.
And say, Jesus, forgive me. Grant me your light for tomorrow.
Grant me your light for tomorrow. It is so incredibly forward-looking, it doesn't wallow in the past.
And the text promises that when you do this sincerely, you will literally feel the physical and spiritual burden fall away.
You don't carry the accumulated sludge of your daily mistakes into your sleep, and you certainly don't drag them into the next day.
You are wiping the slate clean every single night through the mechanism of grace, accessed by a willing conscience.
The source material ends this section with a truly stunning thought from Louisa Picaretta. She writes, "A heart that daily examines itself in the light becomes bright as a small sunbeam."
I love that image so much.
It isn't claiming that this daily practice will turn you into a blinding, perfect, untouchable star. It says you become a small sunbeam.
A localized, genuine source of warmth and clarity in whatever room you walk into, simply because you're consistently clearing away the internal debris that blocks the light.
It is a humble, profoundly beautiful goal, to just be a small sunbeam for the people around you. And the material insists it is entirely achievable through this daily gentle cleansing.
The text provides a short closing prayer to seal this daily practice, and I want you to read it for us as we conclude our deep reading.
Absolutely. Lord Jesus Christ, open my heart for your truth. Let your light burn in my conscience so that I clearly distinguish what comes from you and what does not. Lead me in your peace.
That prayer really encapsulates the entire mission of the source material, seeking ultimate peace in the divine order by tuning the ear of the heart to the only voice that actually matters, the unbribable compass.
As we wrap up this deep dive into these remarkable texts, we want to bring it all back to the ultimate goal. The goal isn't just to learn a neat psychological trick for better decision-making.
No, the goal, as the text explicitly states, is finding true, enduring peace.
And finding peace means listening to the conscience, which means ultimately trusting the guide through the fog.
We have covered so much ground today, from redefining the conscience as a lighthouse rather than a cop, to exploring Bertha Dudde's somatic indicators of truth.
To practicing the 5-second check of the heart. This material demands that we fundamentally change how we navigate our daily lives.
And that brings us right back to where we started.
Remember that thick, suffocating fog we talked about at the beginning? The relentless noise of the world, the endless opinions, the overwhelming data.
We spend so much of our modern lives trying to accumulate more knowledge, more podcasts, more articles, more advice, convinced that if we just add enough information to our intellect, we will finally be able to see through the fog and chart the perfect course.
But Bertha Dudde warned us that the gentle light of the Spirit is extinguished by the sheer volume of the world.
So we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over.
What if the ultimate life hack for clarity isn't adding more to your intellect?
What if the secret to navigating the fog isn't a brighter flashlight, but ruthlessly, intentionally subtracting the noise?
Turning down the frantic volume of your life until only the quiet, unbribable chime of your conscience remains.